Hello, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. How are you doing today, Sarah?
Well, since returning from my vacation in Mexico, I've been under the weather, but doing better now.
Not 100%, though.
I would say there has been a vast improvement.
Yes, I would agree.
How are you today, Ben? It's the day after your birthday.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I had a really nice birthday yesterday. Got a really nice gift from Sarah. Spent some time with my close friends. It was really nice, and I'm feeling really great because of it.
Which is, of course, the best time to watch a horror movie.
Yeah, absolutely. We watched a horror movie on my birthday.
Heretic. It's pretty good. It was our second viewing and our friends' first viewing, and they liked it.
Yeah.
Because they have proper opinions. And before we dive into this week's episode, I do just want to call out, we do have the next installment of our trip in Seattle and Portland up on the Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast. It talks about the time that we went to the Freaky But True Imaginarium in Portland.
Yeah, check it out. One of a series of pieces about our trip to Seattle and Portland that's up there on the Patreon for our lovely patrons.
So what are we watching this week, Ben?
This week, Sarah, we are back with our boy, William Castle.
Boy.
For Mr. Sardonicus.
Another boy.
Yes, absolutely, as indicated by the Mr. part of that title. Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. I know you've been looking forward to it as well. This is like 4 months since Homicidal came out.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, this is our second Castle film of 1961. And after Homicidal, William Castle actually felt that he should go out on top. He was like, I'm king of the gimmicks. Like, Homicidal is, was great. I want to take a break from horror, from gimmicks. I'm going to go on vacation with my wife to Hawaii and take some time off. And then he opened up a Playboy magazine for the articles.
Classic.
And found himself reading a gothic horror story called Sardonicus. And he was like, oh, hot damn, this should be my next movie. And he was right back in the saddle.
They say no rest for the wicked.
So what can you tell me about this short story, this novella, Sardonicus?
So it's definitely more short story than novella.
Okay.
Because it was published in Playboy. It's by Ray Russell, who was also an editor at Playboy. He grew up in 1920s Chicago with a love of science fiction and fantasy pulp stories. And after serving in the U.S. Air Force in World War II, he came back and decided to enroll in the Chicago Conservatory of Music.
Wow.
And then later went to the Goodman Memorial Theater. Combining these two interests, Russell would actually end up composing music for the summer stock theater productions.
Oh, neat.
So you might be wondering, that's all music and what, huh? Playboy, what? So he would follow his love of pulp stories and begin writing his own work through the 1950s, with his first sale being the short story called The Lesser Sin to Esquire in 1953. And then he would find financial stability as an editor at Playboy magazine, eventually being an associate and then executive editor through to 1960. In his work as an editor, he featured genre writers like Ray Bradbury and Charles Beaumont.
A lot of nerdy writing over at Playboy, in fact.
In fact, yes. One of my favorite things in my undergrad was being able to reference Playboy magazine because of an interview with Stanley Kubrick about 2001: A Space Odyssey. In any case, Russell was also the unofficial editor of 40 plus fiction anthologies from Playboy that went out through the 60s, the 70s. Russell's best known work is 1961's short story Sardonicus, and he would later combine two other Gothic tales with it to create his collection, The Unholy Trinity, in 1967. The two other tales being 1962's Sagittarius and 1967's Sanguinarius.
Okay.
He also wrote novels, his very first being 1962's The Case Against Satan, which is notable because it has similarities with William Blatty's 1971 The Exorcist, with a focus on the demonic possession of a child.
Oh, interesting.
But for the record, there's no claims of William Blatty plagiarizing or anything. They just happen to hit on the same kind of theme. Mm-hmm. It just so happened that Russell's was 10 years earlier. Sardonicus wouldn't be his only foray into Hollywood either, as Russell would work on the screenplays for 1962's The Premature Burial, 62's Zots, 1963's X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, 1964's The Horror of It All, and many others. He famously said in an interview, quote, "Surely by this time it is common knowledge that screenwriters, unlike novelists and playwrights, are hired hands who are neither the legal owners nor final arbiters of their own work, and whose every page is subject to the constructive and destructive intrusion of the producer and or director."
Correct.
But it's refreshing that an author has this understanding of his work when it gets adapted to screen.
Sure.
Because there are many cases of authors not understanding that.
And in this case, Russell adapted his own work to the screen.
Yes. So Russell's impact on genre fiction and into film earned him the Bram Stoker Lifetime Achievement Award in 1993, and he would pass away in 1999. So, Sardonicus. It was written to be in the Gothic tradition, which you know is my jam. Mm-hmm. To sum up what that tradition looks like, think building tension through a sense of dread, atmosphere dripping with foreboding, and dark themes that include romance, death, and ruin. Sardonicus is narrated by the character Dr. Sir Robert Cargrave. I wasn't sure if Doctor or Sir would come first, like Sir Doctor.
There are definitely rules.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rule is. But I know that
you would actually.
Yeah, you'd think, right? But I think Dr. Sir Robert Cargrave is correct.
Okay.
I don't think it's Sir Doctor, but yeah, some British person can help us.
So Dr. Cargrave, he travels from London to Bohemia at the request of a Baron Sardonicus. Sardonicus has this facial muscular contortion that has caused a frozen grin. Kind of think about the 1928 The Man Who Laughs, that kind of idea. As Cargrave tries to find a medical cure, he uncovers the dark history that led Sardonicus to have this affliction in the first place. Namely, greed led him, as a young man, to defile his father's grave to dig out a winning lottery ticket. So the treatment ultimately fails and leads to Sardonicus being unable to speak or eat and slowly starve to death. Now, I mentioned that this short story gets paired with two others that Russell put out. What ties the story to those others are more those Gothic themes rather than anything narrative. So 1962's Sagittarius focuses on the theoretical discussion between two characters about how evil the son of Mr. Hyde would be, and kind of tying that person to serial killing, to the Ripper murders and all that. While Sanguinarius is from the perspective of Countess Elizabeth Bathory in defense of her serial killing of young women to bathe in their blood.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing that I read about the screenplay for Mr. Sardonicus was that Russell wrote all three of those stories at around the same time, even though they were published later.
Yeah.
And so elements from Sagittarius and Sanguinarius are used in Mr. Sardonicus's screenplay to kind of like pad out the story to feature length.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the other thing I read was that Robert Cargrave's character like reappears in like future Russell stories as kind of just like a viewpoint character. So I like that kind of stuff. I like continuity.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that Russell is pioneering. It's a tried and true thing, both in like Gothic, but also like, detective stories and all that.
So you can see why when William Castle read Sardonicus in Playboy magazine, he would immediately want to snap up the film rights, because this would give him the opportunity to get to play in the period Gothic horror trend that Hammer had started and then had been so well capitalized on by Roger Corman.
100%.
Like, this is absolutely happening because of the Corman Poe films. If Corman was making this, Sardonicus would be played by Vincent Price, right?
Mm-hmm. To the point where I thought he was.
Right. So the lead role here is actually played by actor Guy Rolfe. True to the inspiration coming from The Man Who Laughs, Rolfe also had to endure some pretty painful makeup for this role. He was born Edwin Arthur Rolfe in London, England in 1911, and he's actually a descendant of John Rolfe and Pocahontas.
Okay.
Yeah. Pocahontas married John Rolfe. They had kids. This is the same Rolfe family.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years later. Rolfe was originally a professional boxer and race car driver before becoming an actor at age 24 and appearing on stage until his screen debut in 1937. He wouldn't get a lead role until 1948 with Terence Fisher's Portrait from Life, and he received probably the most accolades in his career for his performance in The Spider and the Fly in 1949. A bout of tuberculosis in the early 50s hurt his career just because it took a while for him to recover, and by then momentum was kind of gone.
Well, yeah, it's kind of hard to act when you can't really take in deep breaths.
Mm-hmm. So in the late 50s, he went to Hollywood to try and reinvigorate his career. And there he started to pick up good work as like a character actor and villain. He played Prince John in Ivanhoe, Caiaphas in King of Kings, roles like this. The Sardonicus makeup was created by Columbia Studios makeup man Ben Lane, and Rolfe couldn't wear it for more than like an hour at a time.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was, I guess, really difficult. They had to go through like a lot of different iterations to find a version that would look like believable, but also scary, but not humorous, all these kinds of things. And so it was so painful for him to wear this fake sort of prosthetic mouth thing that they made, that like the film The Man Who Laughs, his character wears a mask for a lot of the picture, just so they can avoid having to put the actor in the makeup. The period setting required an investiture into sets and costumes a little bit more than what Castle was used to, because his films were, usually set in modern day. He was aided in this by art director Carrie Odell and cinematographer Burnett Guffey. Guffey was the Oscar-winning DOP who had shot Homicidal for Castle earlier that year. The role of Dr. Sir Robert Cargraves is played by Ronald Lewis, the Welsh actor who we saw as the romantic lead / villain in Hammer's Taste of Fear, also earlier this year.
Oh, Dr. Blood?
No.
That's called Dr. Blood.
Yeah, Dr. Blood's Coffin. No.
Yeah.
Taste of Fear was the one with the woman in the wheelchair who goes to like her dad's old house.
Oh, yes. That one's also very gothic.
Yes, and he's the guy she falls in love with, but he's actually working with her evil stepmother or whatever. Yeah, that's Ronald Lewis. He had been like kind of like a leading man, romantic lead in Britain through the 50s, was kind of groomed for those sorts of roles. But unfortunately, his career was on the decline and his days as a leading man were numbered, partially because the style of leading man he was sort of going out of style. by the mid-60s, but also partially due to his drinking problems. Unfortunately, he was arrested twice in 1965 for incidents related to his drinking and abuse of his wife, Nora. His career continued to suffer. After Nora left him, he married again. Then his second wife left him. His alcoholism continued to be a problem, spiraling until he declared bankruptcy in 1981 at age 52, and then took his own life the next year.
Oh, that's really rough.
In the film, Sardonicus has a disfigured assistant named Krull, who is played by Oskar Homolka. And Homolka was born in Vienna in 1898, becoming an actor after serving in the First World War. He was a prolific stage and film actor in Germany. He worked with Max Reinhardt, but he moved to Britain after the Nazis came to power. And he often played villains due to his accent. He appeared in Alfred Hitchcock's Sabotage in 1936, although he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for the role of like a crusty but lovable uncle in 1948's I Remember Mama. Homolka moved back to Britain in 1966 and passed away in 1978. His co-star in this film, Vladimir Sokolov, who plays Sardonicus's father, had previously appeared with Homolka in a 1926 German silent film. Born in Moscow in 1889, Sokolov studied theater in Moscow, but ultimately rejected the method technique of Stanislavski. He moved to Germany in 1923 to work with Max Reinhardt, but fled the country when the Nazis took power, first to Paris in 1932 and then the United States in 1937. Once situated in Hollywood, he made a career playing basically every nationality under the sun, that kind of old Golden Age Hollywood thing of like, well, if you're not American or British, then you're every other ethnicity, right?
Yeah.
He was an Arab in Road to Morocco. He was Romanian in I Was a Teenage Werewolf. He was Spanish in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Mexican in The Magnificent Seven. The year after shooting Mr. Sardonicus, Sokolov suffered a stroke and passed away at age 72.
Okay.
The role of Sardonicus's wife, Maud, is played by Audrey Dalton, an Irish actress born in 1934. She moved to the United States in 1952 and continued acting after dropping her native accent beginning in 1954. Dalton recalled that William Castle had a great time directing this picture, and indeed he would count it as one of his favorite directing experiences.
Oh, that's nice.
This was the final William Castle horror picture scored by Von Dexter, an Illinois-born composer originally known as Levon Urbanski. Dexter retired when, after this film, he began to suffer from a condition which caused his fingers to stiffen.
Yeah, so hard to play the piano or do any kind of writing.
Hard to write scores.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Of course, no William Castle picture is complete without its gimmick. Now, according to Castle, the impetus this time was Columbia not liking the original downbeat ending of the story and asking for a happy ending where the treatment works and Sardonicus lives. Castle decided, he was very against this happy ending idea, but he decided to have it both ways and shoot both endings and then let audiences decide. So the film would be distributed to theaters with both endings, and the audience would take part in the punishment poll. And the idea here was that audience members were given glow-in-the-dark cards, which had like a thumbs up on them, and you would hold up the cards in the theater so the projectionist could see, and you would hold thumbs up for the mercy ending and thumbs down for the punishment ending. And then the projectionist would tally the results and choose the appropriate reel. Apparently, it revealed something of human nature that no one ever picked the mercy ending, and audiences invariably chose to see Sardonicus suffer for his villainy.
Probably in all likelihood, it was only ever going to be punishment, right?
Yes, no mercy ending was ever shot. The punishment ending was the original ending of the story, and it was the only ending ever considered. They never made the mercy ending, no matter what Castle says. And basically, the whole thing was just a publicity gimmick. No matter what the audience signaled, the punishment ending would play, which sort of gave everyone in the audience the impression that their fellow audience members were very bloodthirsty, regardless of what they had voted, which is an example of something called pluralistic ignorance, where you become convinced that an opinion that isn't yours is the opinion held by the majority of people, even if actually no one holds that opinion. Anyways, yeah, so there was no such thing as the mercy ending. It was all a big gimmick. And we know this basically because despite Castle saying that a mercy ending was shot, for one thing, Audrey Dalton says that no mercy ending was ever shot. But also, if both endings were distributed with every print of the film to all the theaters it played at, we should have the mercy ending, and we don't. Like, there is no film showing this. There's no record of it ever being shot. It's all just a stunt, right?
And it got the studio off his back.
I don't even know if that part is true. Like, I don't even know if the thing about, like, why would Columbia be like, yes, this horror movie needs to have like a happy ending when like the like ironic punishment is kind of like the standard ending for a movie like this, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even know if that part of the story is true or if that's just part of the legend that Castle created in his autobiography explaining this.
No, he would always tell the truth, Ben.
So Mr. Sardonicus was released by Columbia Pictures on October 18th, 1961. Like Castle's other films, it did well at the box office, but it received mixed reviews from critics who found the atmosphere praiseworthy but could not find it in themselves to praise Castle's direction or gimmicks.
I think, honestly, this one will probably feel really like this kind of gimmick. Actually, let me cut myself off there because I don't know how it's handled in the movie.
Sure.
I just know like the biggest downvote part of Homicidal for me was how the movie stopped to be like, hey, gimmick time.
Yeah.
And, you know, who knows if that's in here where William Castle pops on screen to be like, now vote.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Oh, great. What is this, American Idol?
After this film, Castle would take a break from horror and gimmicks and would direct the fantasy comedy film Zots.
Yeah.
In 1962. The only gimmick of which was, I guess, like a big part of the plot of Zots is this like magical golden amulet, and everyone in the audience got like a copy of the golden coin as like a keepsake.
That's not so much a gimmick as
exactly.
It is like, yeah.
It's just keepsake. A publicity thing, but like that's the only thing in Zots that sort of is close to the usual Castle chicanery.
Yeah, but the continued collaboration with Ray Russell is a positive sign.
Yeah, for sure.
So how are we watching this movie, Ben?
We are watching Mr. Sardonicus on Blu-ray from Indicator's William Castle box set.
Okay. Well, hopefully folks can find a copy to watch along. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss Mr. Sardonicus from 1961, directed by William Castle.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Mr. Sardonicus from 1961, directed by William Castle. Ben, what are your thoughts?
The problem with Mr. Sardonicus is that it isn't as good as you want it to be.
Yes, 100%. I didn't really like this. I didn't enjoy this at all.
At all?
Well, there were 3 things I liked.
Okay, interesting.
What about you?
I think there's a lot here that I like, but you thought of 3 things you like. I can think of like 3 major problems that bring everything else down.
Yeah, this movie is fine. I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, I think of it as being very middle of the road.
Sure.
But let's talk about the story.
Sure. So in terms of the large beats, it seems like it follows the short story pretty closely. But let me kind of go into details. So we open in London and we see William Castle giving his introduction. And he offers us the dictionary definition of a ghoul, which he defines as, someone who digs up a grave to then eat what is inside.
Mm-hmm.
Then we see that it is 1880 London, and a Dr. Sir Robert Cargrave is doing this specialized treatment to help paralyzed patients. We see that he restores some mobility to a young girl through his treatment of a warm compress for specifically 30 seconds and then massage.
Mm-hmm. And then convincing them that they can do it through the power of believing in themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. We get a brief look at Chekhov's hypodermic needle, which is apparently a new invention that they have just received at their medical office, along with the rest of the post, which includes a letter from Cargrave's lost love, Maud. Lost love as in, they were in love when they were young, and then because he didn't have anything to his name, they couldn't get married. So then her father had Maud go off and marry this baron, and that's who she's married to now, and writing to Dr. Cargrave for his help because her well-being is at stake, and she needs him to come to Gorslava, the fictional country of Gorslava.
Can you imagine today your parent being like, you're dating a med student? He'll never amount to anything.
So Dr. Cargrave travels.
Sir Dr. Cargrave.
Yes, they place a lot of emphasis on the sir because he earns this knighthood very recently thanks to this treatment that he provides. Okay, so he travels, and in Gorslava, he meets a local at the train who is terrified at the name of Sardonicus. Dr. Cargrave is like, why are you so afraid? Like, what's going on? And the local at the train stop is like, you wouldn't understand. You are young and you have no daughters. Which is like,
Excuse me?
Excuse me? So Sardonicus's servant, whose name is Krull, who we've seen earlier, he hand-delivered the letter to the medical office. He comes here to pick up Dr. Cargrave, brings him up to the castle, and just as they enter, Cargrave hears some strange moaning in the room adjacent to the front entrance. Goes in and sees that there's a maid undergoing a leech treatment with leeches on her face. And he's like, what the fuck? This is like old hat medicine. Like, what are you doing? And takes the leeches off her face because, oh no, it could disfigure her. And Krull is like, no, it's like a medical treatment. I'm doing what I'm told for medical treatment. And Cargrave is like, what ailment does she have that you needed to use leeches on her face? And Krull responds, she's not ill. What are you talking about? Mysteries.
It's an experiment.
Listen, I just do what I'm told.
My master says, Krull, I want something done. I do this thing.
So we get a lot of a creepy atmosphere in this castle with a lot of mystery, like this strange experiment. When Cargrave finally finds Maud, she denies there being any kind of urgency to his visit. There's a mysterious locked door down the hallway. And as Cargrave sees Krull bring some soup into a nearby room, he hears strange slurping sounds. What on earth is going on? They head down to dinner, so Cargrave, Maud, and Sardonicus with his mask on. This is mainly how we see him through the movie. And it's kind of just like polite conversation. However, during dinner, we do see that Krull is punishing the maid who we saw at the beginning. The maid had gone to Cargrave to say, like, please stop the experiments. And Krull's like, you're not supposed to be talking to him. And so she's being held up by her thumbs and getting more leeches on her. For medical experiments again? Who knows? Sardonicus ends up leaving during dinner because Krull has brought some 5 young women to the castle dungeons They've been bribed to come here. One of them gets to stay behind. They've been chosen. And behind a closed door, we know that she has taken off the mask and she screams. And so those screams echo throughout the house. So these are the kind of efforts that we see being put towards atmosphere. The next morning, Sardonicus explains his backstory to Cargrave to explain why he needs some medical treatment. Basically, before he was Sardonicus, he was Merrick, a farmer. And he had a very greedy, vain wife. Now, Merrick's father had bought a lottery ticket, but died before the draw was completed. So when they learned that the ticket had the winning numbers, they realized too late that the lottery ticket is buried in the father's pocket. At the behest of his wife, Merrick decides to go and dig up the grave. And in all of this backstory we get in an earlier instance as well, they keep referring to the digging up of a grave. So a grave digger, a grave robber, as a ghoul. So he's like, I had to become a ghoul. So upon seeing his father's face contorted with rigor mortis, Merrick screams and finds his own face contorted in this ghastly grin. He returns to his wife, and she screams. She ultimately ends up killing herself because how could she be married to someone like this? And Merrick decides to use the lottery money to buy a baron title and change his name to Sardonicus because of the sardonic grin connection. Sardonicus then goes to every medical expert, and they are all unable to help him. So Cargrave is like, well, I think my treatment can help, so let me do this. He tries, and the treatment fails. He says that, there are some more dangerous treatments, but I wouldn't dare do them on a human. They are untested. And Sardonicus is like, no, you'll do them, and Cargrave refuses. So Sardonicus explains that, fine, Maud hates me because of my face, but maybe she'll be more compliant if she has a disfigured face as well. So he threatens to basically cut Maud's facial muscles that will cause her to have this hideous grin, and Cargrave reluctantly agrees to do the medical treatments to save Maud. He orders a bunch of medical equipment, including the hypodermic needle that we saw at the beginning, as well as leaves from the strychnine plant. And he explains that this plant, yes, is poisonous, but the poison causes the muscles to become extremely loose, and he believes that a small extract of that could help with paralysis patients.
And to be fair to the movie, they do set this up, at the start of the movie when he's talking to a doctor buddy about oh, there's this theory or whatever. So
yes.
it's something that the movie
has set up.
Yes.
Now I'll just add an asterisk of that's not how the strychnine plant works. It is poisonous, but it actually causes convulsions and intense tension of the muscles and can actually cause a sardonic grin as a result, which I think is why it's name dropped here.
Interesting.
But it actually does the opposite.
Is it curare that makes you go limp?
Yeah, we saw that in Dr. Blood, actually.
Yes.
So we see that Cargrave is doing experiments on dogs. He's going through the whole process, and he finally has a successful experiment. Sardonicus is like, great, now you do it on me. And Cargrave is like, it was one time, we need to do some more tests. And again, Sardonicus threatens Maud, taking her and putting her into the mysterious locked room, which we see actually has the remains of Sardonicus's father in there to remind him of his mortality and the cause of his hideous grin. So, okay, we'll go ahead with the experiment. Now, Cargrave takes Sardonicus, puts him in the room with his father's remains, and ties him up. And he's like, you see, shock caused this affliction, so therefore shock can cure it. He injects the solution into the jaw muscles and basically closes and locks the door and leaves Sardonicus in with his father. He convulses and screams, and when they return, his face is blank, normal. He no longer has this hideous grin. And Cargrave explains, you just need to relax, let yourself recover. Don't speak. Don't try to talk. Don't try to grin, anything like that. You need to let your muscles recover. Sardonicus then signs a letter that annuls his marriage because Maud is no longer needed as a sexy lamp. Which, for those who aren't familiar with that phrase, that's just a tongue-in-cheek phrase that describes when a female character could be replaced with any object like a sexy lamp, and it would change nothing in the plot because her only role is to be
an object
in danger, passed here to there, like has no agency to the story. So with that marriage annulled, Cargrave, Maud, and that one maid, they leave. They're waiting at the train station, and Krull finally catches up to them and explains that Sardonicus can't open his mouth to eat or drink. It's like frozen shut. And Cargrave explains, like, actually, all of this is in Sardonicus's mind. If he just wills it, he will be able to open his mouth.
Yeah, the solution was water. The magic feather wasn't magic. The power to fly was in you all along, Dumbo.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, even like the experiments with the dogs were all faked. And then we get an interjection from Castle, who says, now is the time to vote. If you feel like Sardonicus has suffered enough, vote for mercy. If you think that he deserves to suffer more, hold up your card for no mercy. And then spends a lot of time tallying, saying, excuse me, young boy, sit down so I can count behind you. Just really chewing the scenery, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very like we're all having fun here kind of vibes, even though, as we know from the context setting, the results of this are rigged in a certain direction. Like Castle's voiceover, well, it's not voiceover, he's on screen. Castle's explanation to the audience about their options also kind of like peer pressures the audience into voting a certain way, because he's like, well, the awful, terrible Sardonicus, like, if you want to vote to have him suffer more, like, go ahead. But, if you're like a namby-pamby, like, whiny sissy boy and you think people deserve mercy, I guess you could vote for that. Like, it's very judgmental if you want to give Sardonicus mercy. And it's not really necessary, given that we know that it's rigged in one direction.
Yeah. So it's going to be no mercy. We return to the movie as Krull returns to the castle, and he tells Sardonicus that I wasn't able to catch them at the train. Oops. Now, here's the thing that I forgot to mention. Krull has a disfigurement of his own. He has lost an eye. And we learn when Maud is being threatened with disfigurement that there's only one other time that Krull disobeyed Sardonicus, and in response, Sardonicus took Krull's eye. So we see that Krull makes a decision because of like, oh, I lost my eye because of this guy. He doesn't deserve mercy. I will not tell him that it's all in his head. And instead actually sits down at the table and mockingly eats the feast that's laid out in front of him. And Sardonicus tries to eat and is flailing and is clearly incredibly upset, and clearly will just succumb to starvation, probably dehydration first.
Yeah, so like a classic, the
Monster
abused assistant turns on their master ending. I think before, just because we're talking about the ending, I will say that the like ironic twist punishment ending of the original, where like he'll never be able to open his mouth, so he's going to starve to death, is like a really hard idea to get across on film in a way that is like suitably horrifying. So Castle tries his best here, but like I don't think it works well, but I also don't hold it against Castle that like this is a hard idea to get across.
Yeah. So that's the end. As I said, I didn't really enjoy this. Where would you like to start, Ben?
So there are a lot of ingredients here that are classic Gothic ingredients.
Yes.
Right? Like mysterious castle, outsiders summoned because they have some connection to someone at the castle, mysterious family secrets, locked rooms that no one's allowed to go into, strange behaviors, people giving vague cryptic warnings that they don't explain, people's behaviors like changing suddenly, etc., etc. We have a lot of stuff here that fits in really well with Gothic tradition. Looking at things from like a very broad perspective, I think one thing went wrong with this movie, and there's like two other problems that I think result from it. But one of the things that you need in Gothic movies is atmosphere.
Yes.
And sort of the vibe, right? And what atmosphere this movie manages to have mostly evokes the universal Gothics of the 1940s.
Yeah, think the so thick you could cut through it with a knife kind of fog in Wolfman.
Yeah, the desolate forests that are obviously sets. We're still in black and white here. In the introduction, Castle says this is an old-fashioned story. And Russell's prose in the short story intentionally evoked the floridness of Gothic fiction, while Castle's film evokes the Gothic movies of the 40s in the sense that it's talky, it's artificial. It feels like a polar opposite direction from where he was taking the genre in Homicidal. It's very old-fashioned. I think the problem then becomes, even though that atmosphere we get, that universal 1940s atmosphere, is old-fashioned and hokey, it's like very, have you seen the start of Dracula? It itself basically goes away once we're in the castle.
Yes.
The picture loses a lot because when we're in the castle, for the most part, the movie is shot like a TV show. It's like brightly and flatly lit. And it only really comes alive again in a couple of places. One is like the moody flashback sequence where Merrick digs up his father and returns home to his wife and she screams and stuff. And the other is a really fantastic scene where Maud is locked in the room in the dark with the corpse of the dad. That said, I was let down by that scene.
Oh, me too.
Because I was really hoping that Alenka, the first wife, was in there. And that, she was the first victim of an attempt to make his wife look like him. And
yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, kind of calling into a Jane Eyre mad woman in the attic. I wanted it to be that first girl who gets chosen.
Right.
But similarly disfigured, same kind of thing. Because otherwise, what the fuck was the point of any of this?
So I think, the implication with the girls... so it's explained that Maud doesn't love him, and he's like, maybe she says it's because I'm cruel and abusive, but I think it's just the face. It's clear to me, at least, that Sardonicus is basically bribing girls from the village to have sex with him because he has that need, but no one's going to willingly do it, right? And the thing is that we don't really, of course, see that. It's just very strongly implied. And I think this is another one of my problems with the movie, which I can get into more once we talk about the punishment pole. But I think too much of Sardonicus's evil is implied or threatened and not shown.
I would agree with that. I also think that any evil that we see on screen leading up to the threatening of Maud is seen being done by Krull. Mm-hmm. And we're told Krull's doing it because his master told him to. But it's also to what end? Leeches on the face for a medical experiment? What is the point of that? We don't see we can put two and two together. Leeches on face, something to do with the face. Maybe they get mushed into the soup that he drinks. I don't know. But nothing is telling us this. And it just feels so I don't know. They should have been more clear about how those connect. I also am it just felt very blasé that he pays the women to come so he can, and also because she screams, it's okay, we're implying sexual violence, which also just feels very why are we doing this?
So, okay. So here's the thing. Like, so, I mean, I didn't really question the leeches on the face thing. It's like leeches draw blood, you know, you're getting blood rushing to the face. Maybe that would help the muscles unstiffen. Like you said.
But why doing it on the maid? Like,
you know, because she's the other person in the castle who's around. To experiment, you know, and so on. I don't know. But the point is, like, when it comes to Sardonicus's evil acts, right? And like, you know, I think the scream is a reaction to the face, but there is still an implication of sexual violence in the sense that, like, the implication through the movie is that no one would willingly want to have sex with him, right? But, like, okay, you know, I have so much.
Can I say a quick thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know if it's quick. He is so nice when he's just Merrick, and he was forced by his vain, horrible wife to dig up the body and then has this big disfigurement. And now she doesn't even want to be with him because of this. And it just feels very like incel behavior of like, oh, I got turned away because of this bitch wife of mine who wouldn't even sleep with me, hated me to begin with because I was poor. I do a thing to get rich, and then she hates me because I look terrible. So now I'm just going to hate the world, and all these women won't sleep with me without even me thinking about my own fucking behavior. Like, it just, like...
Okay, so here, okay. I want you to slow down for a second.
Yeah.
Because you're getting angry at the movie because the villain is an asshole, and, like, I'm just going to point out that the villain's supposed to be an asshole.
Yes, but what I'm trying to also get at is that there's no... The word coming to mind is justification for his being an asshole, but what I mean is, like, reason for it. It's just, like, let me explain. Gothic and melodrama go hand in hand. So you have to have buy-in from the audience. Otherwise, it's just going to be like laughable or like have no weight to it or have no like care for like why these people are in danger or anything like that. You roll your eyes. You have to lure people in with that mystery, with that atmosphere, with like smaller twists and turns, smaller mysteries, so that way you can tease them with a bit of a bigger mystery. The answer's just around this corner, and then it leaves you wanting more. This movie, it felt like it had simple answers. It went with the first thought of like, yeah, I guess he's bribing women and yeah, she'll scream and we won't see anything. Yeah, and behind the door, like, oh, it'll just be like his dead father. Cool, whatever. Like, no, like, well, what about the wife or what about the girl? Like, nothing tying these moments of violence together, nothing tying the leeches in of just like, well, why was that? It felt like when you're watching Lost and it just gets like a twist for no reason because they needed to think of something else. It also felt like very uncreative answers behind the turn in the corridor. It kind of felt like there was like no ramp up at all. Like any kind of like ramp up it was trying to do was with Krull of like the leeches and the torturing of the maid. But then when we get to the next step of torturing or rather disfiguring Maud, Krull's like, boss, are you sure? And it comes out of nowhere to me because like we don't see Sardonicus being evil before that. Really, I guess with the women in the basement. But in any case, like, it never really came into a cohesive whole for me. And with Gothic, you need to have the buy-in so that way you're willing to give it the benefit of the doubt for that cohesion to happen. And it was never willing to give me enough that would allow me to have that buy-in. Interesting.
I also agree that the movie doesn't work and ends up being kind of meh. But I would think the reason why is different. Like, okay. I don't necessarily agree with your problems.
Yeah.
Like the things you've pointed out, not to say that they aren't problems or that you're wrong or anything like that. Like,
we have different perspectives.
Yeah. But the things that you had a problem with, like, I didn't have a problem with. I didn't feel like, oh, there was a lack of justification for what was happening. It was because he's like a classic disfigured misanthrope character. Like, I've seen Phantom of the Opera, like, whatever. I do think that one of the big problems with the movie, and I can't really talk about it without talking about the punishment pole. They're kind of interrelated.
Okay.
The punishment pole, I think, disrupts the movie much more than the fright break in Homicidal did.
Yes.
I know that you felt that the fright break in Homicidal killed the tension in the movie, whereas I argued that it helped build anticipation for what was coming next. And part of that was like, we saw the person like go into the door, into the spooky evil place. And then like the clock comes up on the screen. And we're still looking at the door as we slowly track in. We're still like in the world of the movie, even as there's this clock on the screen and William Castle is explaining like, if you leave, you're a coward, blah. Whereas here, like the movie stops and we go to Castle and we have this whole thing outside of it. Now, granted, a lot of these William Castle gimmicks that we've occasionally felt quote unquote ruined the movie are probably a lot more fun in a theater with an audience, right? Like when you're in with an audience of people who are like holding up the cards and being, yelling stuff at the screen or whatever, it's probably a lot more fun. But it stops the movie dead. And I also feel like, and I think this is where my complaint ties in with yours a little bit, I don't think Sardonicus actually does enough bad stuff to warrant the punishment ending. He mostly just threatens to do stuff, right? He never actually on screen hurts Maud. He threatens to. Or he does honestly kind of mild stuff. Like the leeches gets played up a lot. And the thing is that, like, okay.
Yeah, that's
like,
my feeling too.
Like he's going to bleed her with leeches, like whatever. But also, okay, the doctor, Sir Robert, he points out like, it could disfigure her because they're doing it on her face. Okay, cool. If that's the threat, the movie has a big problem whereby he takes the leeches off her face. We see that she's bleeding from where they've bitten her, right? He kind of wipes the blood off. He tells Krull, like, take care of her, blah, blah, blah. The next time we see her, she doesn't even have fucking scabs on her face, right?
She does. They're very, very faint. The fact that everything is so brightly lit really makes it hard to see. But there were moments where she had a little bit more shadow on her face in like the background, and you could kind of see that they were there.
I really couldn't see them, so that's interesting. Point being that if you want the leeches to be something awful, you need to show that they had awful consequences.
Yes.
Or like, the stuff that he's implied to do off screen, right? Like, which is very like, okay, whatever, right? Because it's all off screen. The other thing is, like a lot of movie monsters, going back to, Frankenstein and Cesare and a lot of early movie monsters, Sardonicus is actually painted with a pretty sympathetic brush. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, he's willing to sacrifice a lot to get what he wants, which is this cure, and he's willing to like threaten Maud and do terrible things to people, and he claims it's because he has like no heart because the world, showed no kindness to him, Phantom of the Opera, blah, 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 right? But the backstory is, his original sin, the thing that's supposed to have damned him, of digging up his father's grave, is portrayed, as you said, as his wife's fault more than anything. It's all this like bitch wife that he had who like immediately is a bad person because he and his dad get home from like
burying his mother.
Yeah, and she's like, where have you been? Why aren't I rich? Like, whatever. She has like a 1960s like updo and like perfect makeup, and they're like farmers in Gorslava. And that's such a mistake, I think. Like, if I was in the audience, I would have voted for mercy, because like Phantom of the Opera, you kind of grow to feel bad for this guy. And he really explains his plight quite well to Cargrave. And we really see how like all of his monstrous behavior is the result of this like misanthropicness that's caused by his disfigurement. And, wow, it could be a great change. Like, I don't think he deserves to starve to death because he hasn't done enough bad shit. Like, it's like, okay, yes, he disfigured Krull in the past before the movie started, right? We needed to see him do something bad and cruel and heartless on screen, or in the flashback. His original sin needed to be strong enough to like warrant all of this suffering that's been placed on him.
He should have killed his wife, like strangle her, let's say.
Yeah.
We should have seen something other than an already dead body in the locked room. I really like the idea of the wife.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, the other way I would go is I wouldn't have the wife. The wife is this weird thing that like absolves him of responsibility and helps him be sympathetic. And I don't think it's a mistake to make him sympathetic necessarily. I'm just saying it's a mistake to make him sympathetic if you are going to be locked into the punishment ending.
Yeah.
If he's going to get punished and die for his crimes, he needs to have fucking crimes to die for. And so like he should have been the greedy one. He should have been the one who was like, Dad, I want to go into the city and like, play cards and like win money. And his dad's like, no, we will stay and be farmers as your mother wanted us to be. And then like the dad dies. And then he's like, I'm going to rob my dad's grave for this lottery ticket. Like the wife should not have been part of it at all. And then like, oh, I was cursed with this face, but I got the money. Like,
Absolutely. 100% agree.
And so like, I think we needed to be more explicit with how awful he was for the punishment ending to work. You talk about how blah, nothing, a lot of the shocks and twists feel.
It just didn't feel like there were any stakes.
Yeah, I agree. It reminds me a little bit of 13 Ghosts, which we felt was kind of like an all ages horror movie. Mm-hmm. Like it feels sort of like that. It isn't quite that because like there is this element of like I bring in girls from the village to fuck because no one will fuck me, but like even that's, you gotta like know what the movie's talking about to understand what's going on there. So I could see that being something you could take a kid to and they wouldn't quite get what was going on there. Maybe I think William Castle has like two wolves inside him. He has two impulses, right? And one is he wants to like shock and frighten his audience. And the other is he wants the audience to have a good time. And the thing about like his famous gimmicks and his hucksterism, which is a huge part of his like persona and, an appeal, is that it creates this tension between like, are you telling a story or are you making a theme park ride? Right. And if you're making a theme park ride, you kind of want everyone to be able to enjoy it. And so there's this thing with Castle where these gimmick things where he comes on the screen and he pretends to tally the numbers and things like that. It's all this very much tone of like, we're all having fun here. And the problem is that the tone of we're all having fun here kind of undercuts horror, right? And so I think the lack of stakes you're feeling is part of wanting the movie to be fun for everybody, right? And not dip too hard, and I think that's probably one of the biggest sins of the movie. I think the other major problem that you've hinted at and I've hinted at, which is like the kind of lack of atmosphere and the way that like the plot's very basic and things like this, I am willing to put the blame for that on, I think, I don't know, but I think the production of this was rushed.
Yeah.
It comes out the same year as Homicidal, right? But also, what's in this movie in terms of the gothic elements are so beat for beat Pit and the Pendulum.
Yeah.
Which also came out earlier this year. And when I say beat for beat Pit and the Pendulum, I mean like the locked door at the end of the hall, the torture chamber under the basement, the like secret passage between the husband and wife's bedroom, the like outsider who's brought into this situation. Like so many of these beats are Pit and the Pendulum, and we don't have enough time to figure out like more clever things, right? We're just sort of, and it's not like the elements in the movie don't make sense. I think they make sense, it's all about the face stuff, right? Like, it makes sense, but it is very like whatever. And that whole thing where it's shot very TV to me is also a sign of
it being rushed.
Because the reason TV was shot like that for so many years is that like when you're shooting on film and you don't have a lot of time, you want to make sure the image is exposed. And the easiest way to do that is to shine light at everything, right? So I think the movie's cardinal original sin was being rushed. I think a bigger problem with it creatively is that it's too it won't let Sardonicus be as evil as he should be, because I think Castle really got enamored in this idea of making this an old-fashioned sort of spooky fun movie, like, you know, in the same way that the prose of the original evoked old Gothic stories, Castle's trying to evoke old Gothic movies, but like by 1961, it's just like, it's not enough.
Like, I like the impulse of, I'll make this old, like the 1940s, like in a cinematic way of evoking the old prose. I like that. He's just, as you said, it's because it's rushed, I think. Because even the Universal movies have mood and atmosphere. Yeah,
totally. I think if I'm going to talk about things that I did like, because I think there's stuff to like here, as I said, I do really like the scene where Maud is left alone in the dark. I was just disappointed by the reveal. It's still like, on paper, it's still a scary reveal. It's just not what I was hoping for, which like...
We've already seen the dead guy's face.
Yeah, you already did that. Exactly. Like, we already did that scare.
Exactly.
Right?
No ramp up.
But I do think the Sardonicus makeup looks suitably horrific.
Yes, I agree. I think they did a very good job on the makeup.
Unfortunately, it also doesn't make any sense. Not just because, like, the whole, like, I got a rictus grin that I can't change from the shock of this thing is, like, a little... I mean, that's Gothic horror, right? That's you know, things where you got to buy into kind of a hokey premise. But the way the makeup is done, like, think about Conrad Veidt's makeup in Man Who Laughs. One of the things they did, he's not just like holding his mouth in a smile for his shots. Like, they wired his mouth open and then they gave him like fake teeth to really emphasize the smile, right? They've kind of done something similar-ish here, although it's just all a prosthetic on top of John Rolfe's face. But they've also altered his nose so that it has like a Phantom of the Opera skull kind of corpse look, which is fine. But then that doesn't explain why relaxing his face makes his nose normal again.
It doesn't help that he has a very prominent nose in no makeup.
Yes. So like that part doesn't make sense. But the makeup's good. I also think the performances are pretty good here. Even though, like, you know, Audrey Dalton has nothing to do as Maud, and
I didn't like her performance. I found it flat.
I think,
but she also has nothing to do.
Yes.
So she's working with nothing.
Yeah. I think Ronald Lewis does a fine enough job as Cargrave. Again, it's a very like paint by numbers kind of role. I think the standouts here though are John Rolfe as Sardonicus and Oscar Homolka as Krull. John Rolfe is really great, like, as a villain under the mask. He gets a lot of really great dialogue, I think, as Sardonicus. He has this great, like, that classic kind of, like, suave, intelligent, cool sort of villain who has, like, bursts of anger. Like, I kept watching the movie thinking, like, he'd be a good Doctor Doom, you know?
Not just because of the facial disfigurement.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Oscar Homolka is clearly having, like, a lot of fun being Krull.
Krull is, like... For me, what I really liked about this movie, the music, the makeup, and Krull. Because I really enjoyed Krull's just like, master tells me what to do, I do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Krull just do what Krull do.
Yeah, he's like actually playing like a character and not like an archetype. It's really interesting. And I agree with you about the music. I don't know if it was just because of like noting in the intro that this is the last time this particular composer worked with Castle, but I really noticed the music in this movie a lot more than in earlier Castle films.
Yeah.
I think my final problem with this film, which I do think, like, it's fine. I think it's fine. I think it's very middle of the road. But I think my other thing is I think it's weird that this movie is called Mr. Sardonicus.
And he's a baron?
When he's Baron Sardonicus, he's never called Mr. Sardonicus by anyone other than Castle, who in the punishment pole sequence repeatedly is like, so do we punish Mr. Sardonicus or show Mr. Sardonicus mercy, as if he's really trying to make fetch happen? And it's like, why didn't you just call this Sardonicus or Baron? Like, why Mr.? Did like Mr. test better than Baron? Like, I don't get that.
Maybe to make it clear that it's a person rather than just Sardonicus.
I guess. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I think it's weird. It'd be like if you went to go see like that 1989 Tim Burton movie with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, and it was called Mr. Batman.
I was thinking more the Mr. and I.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up everything we have to say about Mr. Sardonicus.
Yeah, let's move on to ranking.
Okay. So
I have a very large range.
Ooh, I kind of do as well.
Uh-oh. Usually when there's a movie that I'm kind of just meh on, like it didn't wow me, this movie didn't completely disappoint me, I usually look at where the middle of the list is. And because we have like just over 300 movies, that's around 150. And right around there is Dr. Renault's Secret, or like Hand, White Zombie. So I knew immediately this is not the right area. I need to look lower. And as I started to go down, my eyes fell upon Spanish Dracula at 217, because we both weren't huge fans of that movie, because we, rightly so, I think, compared it to Todd Browning's Dracula, which is much more languid and slow and gothic and tense, whereas Spanish Dracula is very like in your face and like soft for a moment and then in your face. And that really reminded me of the way that Mr. Sardonicus doesn't like ramp up in a natural way.
See, even Dr. Sardonicus is a better title.
Like, yeah, so it felt similar in the way that it kind of swung back and forth. Looking above Spanish Dracula, there are movies like Man Being Monster, Before I Hang the Brute Man, and then I saw The Bat Whispers at 213, which is the sound remake of The Bat. And I thought of the way that The Bat Whispers handles, I forget if they have something at the introduction, but they do have something at the end that's like, hey, don't tell the secret, and how those framing devices, I guess, were much better integrated and felt in support of, even to the point of like it being a full experience than a hard stop. So I felt like The Bat Whispers at 213 is my ceiling, because it successfully did that, whereas Sardonicus does not. Then looking down past Spanish Dracula, I had a really hard time, but there are some movies in here, in like the 220s, that are very unique and creative and are trying for something, like Beast with a Million Eyes, which I was not a huge fan of, but you really liked what they were trying to go for. And I ultimately settled upon Daughter of Dr. Jekyll at 224 as my floor, because it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know, Dr. Jekyll feeling of like teen girl, because teens, I guess. Let's smush these things into a movie. So to me, my range is 213 to 224, because I felt like Sardonicus similarly had smushed things, but they at least were a bit more cohesive than Daughter of Dr. Jekyll.
So you ended up quite a bit under me. We started in the same place, but you ended up quite a bit below me. So we're going to have to figure out something.
Okay, well, tell me about your range.
I also started in the middle with, 151, Dr. Renault's Secret. I felt this movie was very mid, like very, like literally. So I wasn't sure if this should go, above or below that midpoint. Looking above Dr. Renault's Secret, I was like, well, this definitely isn't better than Phantom of the Convent at 141. So that became my ceiling. Looking down, where my eyes went was 172, which is where 13 Ghosts is. I liked this more than 13 Ghosts. 13 Ghosts is fun, but it's very much an all-ages horror movie. And I think Sardonicus does manage, even if it's not as good as, Pit and the Pendulum that it's aping, I think it's better than 13 Ghosts at being a straight horror film. So that ended up being my range, was 142 to 172. However, I see, a lot of what you're talking about. And so your ceiling was 213. The midpoint between yours and mine
is about 191, 192, which is The Curse of the Cat People and The Invisible Man Returns.
So I would put this below Curse of the Cat People.
100%.
For sure. But some of the stuff under this, like, well,
so the climax is here at 196. Also Phantom of the Opera. It's in color. We also found it was a bit mid. It had some interesting things with like the acid melting his face. I think that the climax and all of the Phantom of the Opera rips, well, that was not a rip, that was an adaptation. But in any case, things make sense. Like things make sense of like why, he comes to her in the night to teach her music and what his motivations for doing so. And those motivations might be different here to there, but they are understandable and they make sense for it to belong to this character. Whereas Sardonicus, because of the first wife kind of muddling the waters for how sympathetic Sardonicus may be, Sardonicus merely threatening instead of actually doing anything.
You know, this movie also makes a mistake that we've pointed at a lot of other movies for making, which is like, you know, you're talking about how things don't make sense. And it's like, yeah, why hasn't he already disfigured Maud? If like that was his like, oh, like I'm so hard done by and none of these treatments work. So I'm going to do this thing to you so you'll feel the same as me.
Yeah.
And that made me realize, why isn't Maud the main character? Like, it's yet another one of these movies where, like, if Maud was the main character and we were following her going to meet this guy she's been betrothed to, and then, like, the horror of learning his secret and finding out and being threatened and all of that from her point of view, like in a more Jane Eyre-ish kind of way, I think this would be stronger.
Because then it also begs the question of, like, why now?
Yes. Why is the story happening now? Exactly. Anyways, at 200 is Mystery of the Wax Museum, which I like a lot. And at 202 is Dr. Blood's Coffin, which is a flawed movie, but I think it's better than this.
Yes, I would agree.
So below that's The Devil Doll, which for some reason is above The Mummy, which I don't understand. I do think this might be better than The Devil Doll. So how would you feel about putting this at 203?
So below Dr. Blood, but above Devil Doll?
Yeah. Which also puts it above like Supernatural and Vampire Bat and Cry of the Werewolf and Genuina and the original Bat. I
would be fine with that. For me, it never really coalesces into the gothic that it promises. The Mummy really manages to do that. Supernatural manages to have some very interesting twists and turns.
That's true.
Which I think make it a better movie.
Can you remind me what Shadow the Cat is? It's from 1961. We saw it earlier this very year, and I can't remember.
The cat kills people.
Right. Okay, man. You know, I think you've talked me into it. I think I will put. I'm okay with putting this below the Bat Whispers, but above the Brute Man.
Okay. Wow.
Like, I came way down on this one. I really felt it was much more in the middle. I don't want to come much lower than this, though, but I think you've made your point on some of these things. So, yeah, I would be okay with making this 214.
Cool. Let's do that.
Okay, entering the list at the new number 214 is Mr. Sardonicus by William Castle from 1961, a movie that I think could have been a lot better if Castle had, like, released it in 1962. And not like rushed it in the same year as he had made another movie just because he wanted to get like a Pit in the Pendulum like knockoff out. He waited a year to get his Psycho ripoff out. Wait a year to get your Pit in the Pendulum ripoff out.
Castle really wants people to like him.
Yes.
He really wants to be the face of things.
Yes.
And it's something that is both cringeworthy, but also really understandable. And yeah, it's a really interesting turn for him in his career, because we think back to the original Castle stuff, like Macabre, like where he was doing such great work, but he wanted the public recognition, not just...
Everybody knew who Alfred Hitchcock was, but I think Castle forgot that Hitchcock only did the outro thing on his TV show.
Yeah.
And it fit much better because there was commercial breaks in TV. So like there are natural breaks in the narrative in the way that there aren't in film. And in his own movies, Hitchcock only shows up in like these tiny cameos, right? He's in all the trailers, the way that Castle was in all the trailers for his films. But I think Castle's desire to be recognized has started to overshadow the movies themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we talked about that in Homicidal as well. In any case, if you would like to see this list that we have just ranked this movie on, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the other movies that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this ranking of Mr. Sardonicus or any other ranking of any other movie, please drop us a line through our Ask box on Tumblr or reach out over email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud and a variety of other podcasting apps. If you would like to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe using our RSS feed. If you'd like to help support the show, we would really appreciate it if you would spread the word on social media, on, whatever Discord servers you're in, on, Reddit, in real life, just tell people who you think would be into the show about the show. Word of mouth is the best way for podcasts to grow their audiences. If you really appreciate what we do here and you're curious to see some of the amazing bonus content we have produced over the years, you can head on over to patreon.com/screamscenepodcast and become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month.
So what are we watching next week, Ben?
Next week, we have what I'm hoping is a treat. It is...
But what if I want a trick?
Well, I'm hoping so there is a trick. The movie's in 3D, which feels a little old-fashioned by 1961. But what I'm excited about is it is a Canadian-made horror film.
This wouldn't be our first Canadian movie because that's Wolfblood, right? Oh, no, that's just set in Canada.
That's right. This is our first Canadian-produced horror film. It certainly won't be our last. Canada has a strong tradition of horror in addition to animation and documentary and weird sex movies.
I was about to say, because all of those are cheap to make, but animation is not cheap.
No. But the animation gets government funding, so it's fine. So this is The Mask. No relation.
Jim Carrey?
No relation. Also known as Eyes of Hell from 1961.
Damn, Eyes of Hell sounds metal. Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.